Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Mike Grigsby, with MW Griggs Consulting. As a former public sector CIO, now a smart cities consultant, I'm using this platform to bring visibility and depth to several topics around public sector technology that we don't often talk about in our mainstream conversations. As cities move between 2026 and 2030, there is a readiness gap that we need to be aware of to properly prepare for the demands of technology in 2030 and certainly 2030 and beyond. Today, we're going to talk about, this will actually be part one of a two-part series, a two-part episode. Actually, take that back, it's a two-part episode. As I was going through and doing the research on this topic, I realized that there were so many facets that I just couldn't do it justice trying to unpack each one of those. So I'm splitting the episode into two. Today's episode will talk about the perspective of the convergence between IT and OT, so information technology and operation technology. And then part two, we'll actually get a chance to look through the lens and kind of the perspective from city decision makers, which I'm excited to hear that and lean to it. Today, we're going to be talking about the Phygital Frontier. So what the heck is Phygital? What does that mean? The modern city has actually become a unified fabric of hardware and software where the physical and digital assets, that boundary between them has become virtually indistinguishable. This is the Phygital Frontier, and it's a hyper-converged reality where a vulnerability in a streetlight or water sensor is no longer just an isolated mechanical failure. It's an open doorway into a city's digital assets. So again, as we race toward the 2030 horizon, every physical asset will soon carry a digital heartbeat. That's not futuristic talk. That's not a futuristic possibility. That's our current reality. That's what we're dealing with today. And we need to understand that these technology ecosystems are coming together in a way that we haven't seen like this before, and we certainly haven't seen at this rate, right? And we're using the term hyper-converged, right? Because it's not just that the assets are connected anymore, but they are what I call kind of operationally synergistic, meaning everything depends on everything else. And it's important to understand that this isn't just tech for tech's sake, right? All of this is kind of a natural evolution of where cities are going and implementing and utilizing technology for better safety outcomes, greater efficiency within the organizations, better cost saving and better fiscal responsibility. And even more so nowadays, we're creating these grand may be too sensationalist of a word, but we're creating these greater citizen experiences as people move in, across, and through our cities. My guests today are not only experts in their respective fields, but I have the great privilege of calling them good friends. The discussion today is not a technical one. It's designed to really just open the aperture so that we better understand what's on the horizon, so that we can prepare for it and really deliver, like I said, deliver a better experience across the board. So my first guest, Terry Yates, is a former CTO, Chief Technology Officer for the town of Cary, North Carolina, a suburb of Raleigh. He is now the owner of Centanni Global Partners Consulting, taking all of his years of experience and bringing that back into the municipal world. My other guest is Dean Cunningham, who is the Public Safety Business Development Manager for Axis Communication. Axis is a global technology leader in IoT solutions such as video cameras, access control, audio systems, and so much more. Dean and I also share a background in law enforcement, and we bring a critical public safety eye to just about everything that we do. So let's dive in. Well, actually, before we do that, I've got a bit of a preamble that I think is important because we're using this term hyper-converged, and it's not just a buzzword. I think it's important to understand why we're using it. Again, when we're looking at what's happening across information technology and operational technology, there is an acceleration of the convergence of those two that have historically been siloed, right? They've been walled off, they've been adjacent, but they've been walled off, and they're now needing to find a common language between the two. And you're bringing together two different worlds at a level and rate and kind of totality that we haven't seen before. We're going to dive into that very much so. But I wanted to go back, as I was researching this, I wanted to go back, since we're talking about the physical world and the digital world. You guys may not know this, I found this in my research, but one of the earliest examples of, I don't know that we could call it IoT just yet, but one of the earliest examples goes back to 1982 at Carnegie Mellon University. So in the computer science department, the main Coke vending machine was several floors away from where the lab was. And what was happening was students would walk down there and only to find that the Coke was either out or it was warm because it had just been loaded. As you would imagine from Carnegie Mellon students, they kind of rigged up a system where they put switches in and so forth, and were able to connect it to the ARPANET back then, which is a precursor to the modern internet today. And they were able to determine whether there was, what the quantity of Cokes were in the machine and the temperature of that. And I think why that's important, right? We found that's an example of looking at a physical asset. Here it is in the material world, and they were doing remote monitoring for it. So they were trying to understand what was happening in that physical asset or with that physical asset. And then they were sending data back, right? They were sending information about, what the soda temperature was or what the soda count was. And while that's kind of a comical, laziness, first world problem type example, it really becomes the precursor to everything that we're going to talk about today. I want to read this, Dean, because it's important to see this from the perspective of Axis. Pioneered the IP-based camera back in 1996. As the company has expanded its influence, as a global technology player, Phygital is something that you're really familiar with, right? You're combining physical assets with digital assets. And I want to talk about it from the work that you're doing, as Axis is working with cities across cities, historically cities' traffic departments, police force, public works, They bought separate hardware for the same purposes, but they bought separate hardware, used it separately, implemented it separately, financed it separately, right, operated it separately. And just talk a little bit about how Axis is helping cities move toward a unified OT, operational technology architecture, where one physical device can actually serve multiple digital demands.
Yeah, first off, Mike, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, part of this conversation. I love talking about this stuff, and I love the story about the university students, because it really, I think, shows that innovation is really sometimes driven by necessity, right? Like they had to know if their Cokes were cold and if they were ready, and so how do you solve that problem? And in this world where IT and OT all are starting to come together, you're seeing sometimes a slow move depending on the city, because in the past, just like you said, different, whether it was traffic, public works, the police department, parks, whatever it might be, they had a very "this is mine, not yours" mentality to it. Is that I'm going to hold on to this. This is mine. I bought it. I'm the one who's going to do X, Y, or Z. And in the past, which is interesting to talk about in technology, like you said, in 1996, we developed the IP camera. It's really not that long ago, but the hockey stick of innovation has gone now where it's crazy the amount of data that you can get from sensors at the edge. And so what people are starting to see and need to really start to address is all of this data is available across all of these different platforms and all of these different siloed agencies right now. And there's so much opportunity to bring it together. And the data that the traffic department might need is probably very similar to what the police department might need in a real-time crime center, or public works might need, for road, like is there a pothole there? Is there an issue with our road that we need to deal with? And all of that is there. We just got to figure out how to play nice in a sandbox, I guess, is probably the way to do it. Is the biggest obstacle I see right now to people moving to this convergence is themselves, is the people who are holding on to their kingdom and going, this is mine and I'm going to control it. And that's preventing some pretty cool stuff from happening. The cities that I see where people are working together and having burden sharing over budgets. So instead of saying, well, we need to put a camera here for traffic so that we can see the intersection, they're starting to realize that, hey, if we put that camera there so that we can get traffic count and see if the intersection's clear, what if we share that data and that sensor with the real-time crime center? And now that camera's got a dual purpose within our city. And maybe we can use the metadata stream that comes back with that to do all of these cool things and just gather information. And I think that is the part where we're really trying to get people towards is just trying to play nice together and then show them the outcome. That's the biggest thing, is people, if you can show them that we have a shared outcome, that this is what we want and we can play together, that's what city leaders want to hear. They don't necessarily want to hear, well, it's just about security. They want to hear about an outcome that is best for their community. And people are starting to come around to that a little bit. And the places that are being really innovative with it are working together to gather all that information and then put it out so that the public gets the benefit of it.
No, that's really good. You said something just a minute ago, and I want to swing back to it. But looking back through your lens, for public safety, that definition has kind of taken on. I've watched it over my time as a public safety officer as well. I've watched public safety kind of balloon as this umbrella term that captures so much more. Talk just briefly, one, about how the convergence between IT and OT is effectively changing that definition, but also give me your thoughts on why you think that change of definition is being lost on city decision makers and leaders. How come that's such a challenge right now for them to grasp the definition of digital security as also public safety?
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is that people lose sight of that this city's job is to provide services and make a quality of life for the people. And sometimes people forget that hey, I'm just going to stay in my lane. You hear that so often, is that I'm just going to stay in my lane. This is my lane and I'm going to stay in it. And as you start thinking bigger, you start thinking like, hey, we're in a system or an ecosystem throughout the whole city, and the public safety is just not about people and places anymore. Now it's about this system so that we can keep traffic lights going. We can understand all of these different systems within a city that people depend on every single day. Those are all coming together, and that is changing the definition of public safety a little bit. Like I said, it used to be people and places. Like, okay, we're going to protect this place and we're going to protect people. Well, now we're also talking about protecting systems, because like you said earlier, knowing that a water sensor on a river is showing an increase in water level becomes a safety issue, because you might have the potential for a flood at that point. And so being able to tie all this sensor data together to give people a really good idea of what the emergency management needs to be within a city is a new, it's not necessarily a new thing, because everyone's always trying to think about it as an emergency management part, but now there's so much data. Before it was like, well, I've worked here for 20 years and I know this. Well, now I've worked here for 5 years and I have all this data that shows me traffic flow and shows me downtime with buses. It shows me response time within a police department, and all that stuff can be available and put together and start making some really solid data decisions to improve quality of life.
That's so good, Terry. I could see you. You're burning. I could tell. I know. You know, the town of Cary is literally, and I don't mean this in hyperbole, literally world renowned for its smart city initiatives. Some of the things that you've not only achieved, but some of the things you've been able to shift culturally, nationally over the last probably 10 years or so has really been amazing. You know, Dean and I were talking about this convergence between IT, OT. Talk a little bit about how town of Cary was able to do that, because you guys didn't start from scratch. This was more kind of a brownfield opportunity than it was a greenfield. You had existing staff, you had existing departments, and et cetera. Talk a little bit first, because we're going to dive into where Cary has been, but talk a little bit about, like, what did it take to get your traditional IT staff and your legacy OT operators to come together and one, just acknowledge that they have to start having a common or developing a common language, and where did you go from there? So just kind of start to unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, and thanks, Mike, for having me. And really to expand on, a lot of things Dean said. I think the first big thing was having that strategic vision of, like, from an organizational standpoint, where do we want to go? And what I mean by that is identifying, visualization. Do you want, like, your short-term visualization? You have all this data coming in. Well, what do you want to visualize? I have a great story about when I first moved into the smart city role. We had our EOC, we had a hurricane coming. I walk into this EOC and there's like 20, 30 monitors, and every one of them's got a dashboard on it. And I'm like, this is crazy. How do you, and they were scrolling tabs trying to get to this other dashboard. And I'm like, this is what I'm talking about. We need to collapse all these monitors into more of a holistic vision and short-term situational awareness. Work order management, oftentimes you have all these systems with multiple work order management solutions. Well, how can we converge that into one work order management system? Get the data in, if we have that stormwater event, can we dispatch the fire truck and the public works truck, to the same event and it be this cohesion? Analytics, how does this system work with that system? So I think that one of the hardest things is defining that vision and then getting everybody on board with it. And then from a tactical standpoint is identifying all the systems. I was fortunate enough to have some great OT subject matter experts. We had our Smart City Committee. We met regularly. We talked about the vision. How can we achieve the vision? And they identified what system. They told who handles this system. Who's the owner of the system? What data is important? We get all this data, but what data is important? Right. We got all this data, but what's really important to you and what's important to other departments? And so, and how can we even integrate it? Can we integrate that? We had some great vendors too as well. On the vendor side that put their respective egos aside and work together of how can we integrate all that together.
As you were talking about all the different monitors and, like, how do we collapse that? I have this image of a Rube Goldberg machine, right? This wacky, mousetrap that has 15 different systems and everything to close the trap. And it's like, you mentioned something just a second ago, and you talked about how do we integrate this, right? Not only do we have to figure out what is most important, right? The outcome of this mousetrap is springing the trap at the end of the day. Like, how do we concentrate on that? And the reality is, and this shouldn't come off as a blame, right? We built this Rube Goldberg machine because we had to. We didn't have the technology when we needed it. We didn't have the capabilities. We didn't have the talent or the knowledge to do it. So we had to build this kind of wonky thing that now that we were able to have the capabilities and everything else, we've got to look at collapsing it. But that collapsing, the move to do that, brings about what I call the integration tax, right? Once you've got these siloed systems, you've implemented them, there's a tax, there's a cost to either financially or time-wise or other resources that you're having to expend to make not just the legacy system talk to the new system, but to make every new system talk to every new system. You've done a little bit of that, especially on the Terry. You've done some of this, especially on the OT side and kind of the work that you're doing right now. Talk a little bit. I don't want to get too specific about it, but talk a little bit about the OT work that you're doing, working with SCADA systems or anything else like that's really moving into that new kind of IT space.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that comes together with, from an IT perspective, understanding the OT operation, building the partnerships with the departments, understanding their business. Before we even talk about IT systems, I've been in IT for 30 years, and then I've been intimately working with like stormwater. And so I've learned more on the stormwater side. In the last 5 years, I've learned more on the stormwater side to where I feel like I've almost transitioned. Now I'm more OT, because I'm understanding their business, what's important to them. And I think that fosters that relationship, that gets buy-in. And so then they really want to work with you. And my position on it is, traffic systems are specialized. SCADA systems are specialized. You're going to have those, and they are subject matter experts, and they understand that business. My thing is, let's partner. Let IT and myself handle the data management piece, the security piece. Like, that's our expertise. And then let's meet your objectives and meet our objectives. And then that gets buy-in, that fosters buy-in, that collaboration. And then you can bring it in, and then you can establish that vision and show what's possible. And then once you do that, they're your biggest advocates. Once you establish that vision with, let's say, one department, one group, you create that, you show the vision, you make it happen, and then they're advocating for you, and then it makes that job of collaboration so much easier to do that. And specifically, utilities has to respond to stormwater issues. Well, now they have this data, they have this real-time data, and they can go respond to that. And before, they never had that before. So you get that cohesion and building upon that effort. So.
I can't remember who mentioned it, but you talked about kind of having to get past this, this is mine. It's like Gollum, my precious, this is the thing that I've held blood, sweat, and tears. This is my thing. And we're having to do this. The example came up not that long ago that, as cities are beginning to get smarter streetlight networks, smarter streetlight systems, the utility side or the lighting department side is going to have so much intelligence around what that light is. They're going to know voltage drops, they're going to know line condition in, line condition out, they're going to know all these different things. But the police department may not be able to tell whether that light was on or off during the traffic accident that occurred last night, right? Being able to share that kind of data just brings an efficiency to overall city function that we really haven't talked about before. And I mean, we've visualized it, we've imagined it, but we haven't seen it in action. And I think it's important also to understand too, it wasn't, as we talk about where the advance of technology is going and kind of what we see on this 2030 horizon, I think it's important to remind ourselves that it was not that long ago that a traffic light was a novel thing in cities, right? Traffic lights have not always been around, and the understanding of driving up, that has now, in 2026, that is such a normal thing, we don't even give two thoughts about it. But as this IT-OT convergence is happening, we're in this awkward, gangly transition phase, and so we're feeling it. Going to 2030, some of this that we're dealing with now that's awkward and painful may very well become the new normal. So, Dean, I wanted to swing back on that same question. As we talk about the integration tax, from an industry side, from a service provider side, that tax it's taxing you all as well, your side as well. How does industry look to find those kinds of integrations? Because certainly for an entity to access, you're having to push feeds into so many different types of systems, this real-time crime system, this monitoring, this VMS, all these different things. What does that integration tax look like on the industry side?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about trying to integrate sensors that are 10 years old, because cities aren't just, I mean, unless I'm just not visiting the right cities, there's not a city around that's just sitting on money. They're trying to figure out how to spend it. They don't exist right now. So they're being very cautious and careful, as they should be, about how they're spending their money. And so you have some places where sensors may be over 10 years old, and think about the technology change in 10 years just in your cell phone. Just look at the difference that your cell phone is today versus 10 years. So trying to figure out how to get all of that old technology in with the brand new technology, where you have deep learning analytics and the ability to really get some really cool insights, it becomes one of those things where you're like, all right, how do we make this happen? And so you start thinking about, how do we have open platforms? And that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to cities about, is future proofing is a myth. Like, I think that was a word invented by salesmen, I'm pretty sure. I think maybe future prepared is maybe a little bit better, because the analogy, I don't know if it's an analogy, but there is a 15-year-old kid sitting in his mom's basement somewhere that is developing the next best thing that all of us are going to need, and we don't know it yet. And if you are in a closed system, you're going to miss out on the technology advances that the kids at Carnegie Mellon are making because of their Coke. So how do you prepare for what you need now versus what you are going to need? And I kind of look at it as you're renting convenience. So like right now, somebody comes and says, you can do this and you can do all of these things right now. And you're like, man, that is so easy. Yes, let's go. Without looking forward to the next 3 or 4, 5 years down the road of what technology advances are going to come, and how are that technology that we're going to maybe want, how does that fit into what we just did? And so going back into that integration part that we were talking about is, how do you catalog, how do you inventory what sensors and software and programs, all these different things that all of these different departments have. So that's where I usually tell people, I'm like, hey, before you buy anything, you might want to figure out what you have first. Like, before you just start going, yeah, this was a great demo and we need this, figure out what you have, see if it's going to work with that software, see if it will work with the next best thing that comes up. What happens if you decide in 5 years that either that system's not doing what you want, it's too expensive, or you have to switch? How are you going to pull all your data? How do you own that data? Are you going to be able to pull that data out and have it be manageable in a new system? So there's a whole bunch of things to think about, which is why I really encourage people to try to look for the ONVIV compliant systems that can take in multiple manufacturers and multiple data sets, so that you are prepared for the next best thing.
Yeah, that's such a crucial point. We forget, each side is, kind of a woe is me. This is what this is doing to me, and this is what this is doing to me. Forgetting that we're we're climbing the same mountain. Terry, you
can I add on to that, Mike?
Oh yeah, absolutely, please.
It kind of goes back to the point, like with Dean, of inventory in the system. Oftentimes you'll find that you've got 3 systems doing the same thing, and maybe you can consolidate. An agency can consolidate, and that money savings will allow you to upgrade to that new technology and eliminate all 3 of those. And I think that inventory process is super important, because once you know that, you can really make some headway on gaining efficiencies and integrations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I think in one of the previous episodes, I talked about it was an aha moment for me. As a CIO, I realized this then, sitting in the chair, is that the workforce that's there. We have, I always use somebody like Betty or Steve or Frank or somebody like that that's been in the organization for 20 plus years, 17 plus years, some extended period of time, where they become the subject matter expert on a system, right? Betty has a spreadsheet that she uses, right? And she developed it. She put the blood, sweat, and tears into it, and she uses that. And everybody trusts that Betty's going to be able to deliver that. Frank is using this one mechanism, this one trick, this one hack for himself on the OT side, right? The challenge is that these people are not Luddites. They're not dragging their feet, and this was the aha moment. They're not dragging their feet on change. The kind of the delay or the how should I say? Yeah, I guess just the delay in making that change is that they are reminding themselves that they are.
We lost you, Mike.
Oh, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you.
That they are still they're reminding themselves that they are still the subject matter expert. Every Tuesday, every Monday, every Wednesday when that report gets run, people call Betty with that question. People call Frank with that question. And they know inherently that on day one of whatever the new system is, they can't deliver that same quality of subject matter expertise. And so they're kind of navigating that along the way. I think it's interesting too, and I wanted to come back to this. Terry, you and Nicole Coughlin, the CIO, you all were able to make headway with the city leaders, with the city decision makers, and kind of the executive levels within the city on things that just wasn't naturally understood or inherent. So I wanted you to talk about that a little bit. At the same time, how do you keep that executive level informed on what's next? Because I've said this jokingly that the antidote to momentum within a city is a change of administration, right? Every time you got to cycle that out, everybody pauses, stops trying to figure out what the next thing is. How do you move some of those conversations into the operating system level and keep the executive level informed on where the needs are going?
Yeah, so I think a great example of that was, we had those subject matter experts that you were talking about, and I'm going to plug some folks here. I had Billy Lee in stormwater. I had David Spencer in transportation, Emily Barrett in sustainability, and Sarah Brayman utilities. I had all of these people that were the subject matter experts in their areas, and they were part of basically a committee. And we met, monthly. We had, we identified real actionable items. I leveraged them, and they knew their operations. They knew how things worked. And I leveraged them, and we talked about what's important to them, because in those discussions, if stormwater's talking about something, then traffic was like, oh, that's super important to me too. And so, then you started identifying, and we talk about all this data, but I really tried to focus on what are the top 3 things that's important to you. Like, because you get so lost in the data and so lost in the minutia and what you're trying, this huge thing you're trying to accomplish. Let's just accomplish some small things that are meaningful, that are impactful. And we were really fortunate that, each one of those individuals, their managers, their directors, and even upper management, there was buy-in. They allowed them to have time to work with all of us to achieve this goal. And so it's important to have that upper management buy-in, because, if they're so busy they can't even attend the meetings, it's just kind of going to fall apart. And so, I was very fortunate. And again, it goes back to that vision. Here is the vision organizationally for, situational awareness, work order management, analytics, having that overarching vision, and how can the OT and IT and operational folks work together to meet that vision, to make that vision happen. It was very interesting. The last year, I always say this funny story, the last year before I retired, I got so much more accomplished because I saw this deadline, and I was like pushing. People probably got annoyed with me, but I was pushing because I wanted to see this happen. I think the organization wanted to see it happen. So, we were all pushing and to this vision, and it's just about, I think it's just about not getting people so overwhelmed that they can't work towards something. And so just identifying what those key points are.
Yeah, and I find that Oh, go ahead, Dean.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Terry, I think that was a great point. I think one of the things that comes into this a lot, like a barrier to it, is when people look at things as just a worst case scenario. So it's like always, like every time, like in law enforcement, and we all, we talk about responses. Everybody always defaults to an active shooter. Well, that's a high risk and a highly important thing. But what about the thing that happens on a daily basis or a weekly basis that you have to prepare for? And so when people start seeing all of this stuff as part of that infrastructure that can improve awareness and coordination and get to that shared outcome, then security becomes, and public safety becomes, part of a city's performance, not just one thing. And so as people start looking at these assets that they're purchasing, whether it's hardware, software, and how it ties into the operational part of it, is anything that doesn't have a dual purpose. So it's not just about risk mitigation, but also if it doesn't improve performance for the city, you need to start looking at that a little bit. So start looking for the things that do risk management, risk reduction, but also improve city functions. I think that can help people do that part. And then like Terry said, if there's an actual deadline, like, hey, I'm retiring in this amount of time, or a deadline, but bringing those stakeholders together is hugely important, because then everybody wants to feel included, right? Everybody gets left out. They're more likely to do this is mine and I don't want to be a part of this. Everybody feels included, and they have that shared vision of security and performance. Man, I think you can do some really cool things. I mean, that's a small group of people is the only way that anything's ever changed, and I think that's great.
And on top of that, those subject matter experts would communicate up to their directors, and it's a formal process, and so there was always that communication, having that communication. Hey, this is what we're working on, making sure everybody's in alignment, and moving that up, and having that open communication up to the top and back down.
Yeah. I find it interesting in 2026 still, the number of leaders that I come across, decision makers that I come across, that still say, I don't understand this technology thing. I don't understand this IT thing. And I get it on the one side, but on the other side, it's like, if you couldn't be a CEO and go, I don't understand this supply chain thing, or I don't understand this operation thing, right? It's so integral to what to the complete operations of your organization that you can't afford for it to be a black box still. And as you don't need to learn how to code, you don't need to learn how to secure the network or anything, but you do have to understand what that means in the grand scheme of things, as cities try to move forward and look at take advantage of emerging tech or emerging tech benefits. You've got to understand what this looks like. And I said earlier, at the beginning, it's like, we're finally at a time. I've been saying it since at least 2009, probably even before then, but like, you have to look at these technology decisions at an enterprise level. Right? It's high time that we recognize that our digital infrastructure is as critical as our physical infrastructure, and in many cases, it's more so, right? We said it earlier, right? If a failure in a sensor for water or some other physical component is an entryway into your digital environment, you've got to understand what that means. We make 50-year master plans for parks or sewer systems, but we're still procuring technology on a 3 to 5 year, transactional cycle. It doesn't work. Now, I mean, none of us knows what this technology is going to be 50 years from now, but we don't know what sewer systems are going to be 50 years from now. The fact that we're planning for it and prepping for it and understanding that this is a long-term ownership, that's the way we need to kind of reorient. Dean, I was going to ask you, I know that you have delivered a lot of executive briefings, and you typically work with, I'll call them the practitioners, or the people that are kind of boots on the ground, so to speak. But you do elevate from time to time and have those conversations, strategic conversations, executive briefings, and so forth. What are you seeing as kind of is there a blind spot at that executive level? Is there a trick? Is there a hack that you use to help them understand and kind of connect the dots around this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's all who your audience is super important, right? So like if you're talking to somebody who's sitting in front of the computer that's clicking on the button to look at the video, that's one level that you need to talk to. If you're the higher up you go in the chain, the wider you got to cast how this affects their organization, if that makes sense. So, and kind of like we were talking about, is they want to know about uptime and protection, and what does this mean for the citizens? Are they going to see a direct benefit by having this come, and is it going to improve their operational efficiency? So that's one of the things that I think people, when I talk higher up, is I really start talking about business operations and business efficiency. Like, how is this, it's because let's call it what it is at this point. It's computer vision. Like all of this stuff that we're doing with these sensors, particularly the what people are calling cameras now, it's computer vision. It's looking for, and it's taking back all of this data and it's running it through models, and it's telling you where potential vulnerabilities are and anomalies and different things. And if you start talking to some people about even that part, they start to gloss over. But if I tell them, hey, you can take all this information, you could even potentially put it into a digital twin, and you could look at how you can efficiently move people from one area to another, whether that's on a bike, foot, cars, whatever that might be. You can do it safely in an emergency. You can really hone in on emergency plans to make your city safer, and you can get a return back to normal. So some of that, like emergency management concept of being able to work through an issue, plan for an issue, work through the issue, recover from the issue, and then get back to normal. How does this help you do that? So try to talk at that higher level of how this is going to make your business more efficient, and how your employees are going to be able to be making decisions based off of data, which will make your decisions more intelligent, and then how it's going to affect their quality of life, because that's really the things that the higher ups want to talk about, is what does that look like? And so I try to spend a lot of time talking about the benefits and the shared outcomes of what they're trying to get to, instead of the technology. Because like I talk to police chiefs all the time, and if they can tell me what their VMS is, we've got a problem. So like I never ask, like people are like, well, what VMS? They're like, I'm not asking the chief of police what their VMS is. He's not going to know. And if he does, then there's some questions that I have at that point. But if I talk to the chief or the mayor or city council members about shared outcomes and how the technology leads to intelligent decision making, which leads to a better quality of life, that starts to click with them. And they'll let the smarties figure out how to make that work. But if you talk about that part, it'll be all good.
Yeah. As we start to kind of bring this to a close, I want us to look out on the horizon. And Terry, as you are working with cities, kind of a two-part question. What is the greatest challenge, and what is the greatest opportunity that you see as this continues, this IT, OT convergence continues to push forward? What's the greatest challenge and greatest opportunities that you see within the city, kind of city as an organization?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges, I think, is user adoption. Like as Dean was saying, people get kind of hung up on the technology piece, but it's like, Department X implements the system. Well, they wanted to share it with everybody. Well, I've got all this stuff I'm trying to do during my day, and I can't get my job done. And now you want me to work on this use this other system. And so I'm a big proponent of, and I think this helps with security. I think it helps with user adoption. Data management is utilizing those enterprise systems. I'm a big proponent of using like ArcGIS, because many agencies have ArcGIS. Bringing the data into that, and then most departments have their data already there. And so can we bring this technology into that platform, because that platform is that 10-year, 20-year platform, enterprise level, and get that data in there, because it's going to be used with other data. And so when was used with their other data, then you get user adoption. Well, I just got to learn this couple little keystrokes, and now I can do that on the system I'm already using. And again, it goes back to the OT folks are managing the stuff behind the scenes, but the organization benefits because they are using an enterprise platform and they are utilizing the data in the ways they want to utilize it. And so I think, that is one of the big, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And then identifying those top three things, we're going to measure against. Like, here are the top three things that is going to make the biggest impact with my department or the organization, and let's measure against that.
That's good. Dean, similar question. Biggest challenge, biggest opportunity, more on the technology side, right? As you start to smash these two environments together and they become one, you said something earlier, you referenced, I should say, you referenced real-time crime centers, right? I keep hearing that those are just going to be real-time centers. Take the crime out of it, they're just going to be real-time centers, right? And we're going to have this understanding of what's going on. Don't give away the trade secrets, but what do you see on the horizon as kind of the biggest challenge and the opportunity as we're in this transition period from merging IT and OT?
Yeah, I think right now in the short term, the biggest challenge is just getting the city departments to work together. Right now, that is still the biggest challenge in the short term. The long term is people are going to need to be able to recognize as they do start moving together that they're going to expect their infrastructure to not only support safety, but support service delivery and outcomes. And so to be able to look and see what that looks like. And so you're going to be looking at the opportunity then becomes a shared operational awareness layer in your organization. So what is happening right now? And can we maximize that data? So one of the things that I think a lot of people are going to start going to or start looking at is digital twinning their city. And I know that there are some places that are ahead that are doing that. But what it does is that it takes that real-time crime center and it turns it into, an overall emergency management or a management system of the city. And if you're able to take historical data and pour it into a digital twin, and then when you're planning for whether it's an event, an emergency, whatever it might be, you have a better plan because you have historical data of movement, of what happens when, if it's a storm and you have to extract people from a stadium or extract people from a festival or whatnot, what happens? What does that look like? So you have a historical data that you can have a better safety plan for whatever incident you might be dealing with. But then you also can use all those sensors and that computer vision to use in real time to say, hey, we thought we were going to push everybody out of gate B and this way. Well, gate B is now the problem, so we have to make an adjustment. And I can look in real time and see, hey, everybody, we're pushing everybody this way. Now I need to switch all the lights for the next mile so we can get people going and get people moving. And then I need to talk about, hey, are we getting enough rain that we've got to figure out how to divert water that's doing X, Y, and Z. And you can get some real insight into what's happening right now, along with historical data. And then I wouldn't say the best part about it, but then the third part is now you can go back and look. And you can say, this is the data that we have. This is the decisions that we made. This is what we did really well. Let's make sure we do that again. Here's some area of improvement. And it's based on data, not just what you felt. And so then you can really talk about it, and then you can tighten up your management of your system for the next go around. And it's Mike Tyson, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's that same thing, is that if you are like, this is what I want to do, and then it's not working that way, at least you have the structure of this is what we can pivot to. And this is what we've done in the past. It's worked well. And I think that's going to be the biggest opportunity for people, is to be able to utilize that data to make really solid decisions based on historical data, real-time data, and then future thinking, and be able to tighten up how to deliver service to their communities.
Yeah, I love it. I watched kind of saw some demos, early demos of digital twins. And, from a public safety standpoint, one of the things that I saw was that because they understood, or because they had already mapped out the city, fire department knew to roll the 60-foot ladder truck instead of the 40-foot ladder truck because of physical obstacles that were in that area where where the fire occurred. Being able to do that, and like you said, respond to different events, different incidents, different needs, right? Not even on the emergency side, just normal everyday traffic. How do you reroute that, and so forth? This opportunity to gain this intelligence is really what we're talking about. We won't go into it, but as we talk about this physical and kind of the physical and digital and this IT OT, one of the things that's on my radar right now is vehicle to infrastructure, or vehicle to anything communication, and what our vehicles are going to be able to do in the not too distant future. So thinking about how the system will become intelligent, specifically with like V2X. Historically, roughly 40,000 traffic fatalities have occurred in the U.S. for the last 100 years. We're not learning from our own mistakes. But as the system begins to get intelligent and smarter on that, what a traffic accident or a traffic situation in Cleveland can solve something that's going on in Phoenix, because the entire system becomes aware all at one time. So it's a fantastic way that we're going there. Again, we're kind of in transition mode, et cetera. One last question, just lightning round. Give me one thought. What do you think between now and 2030? What do you think is going to be the killer phygital solution that everybody is going to, I guess maybe not even solution, standard, you think everybody's going to be on by 2030? Pure conjecture. Cary?
Let me think about that a second. Well, I mean, just the AI components of all these technologies that are coming out, and the capabilities, and just the rapid change. I think, it's the balance of how this AI technology is going to improve, but also, what are the security concerns around that? But that's right off the top of my head. That's what I would think.
Yeah, Dean?
Yeah, I think the thing that's going to happen in 2030 is you're going to see within these enterprise platforms that you're talking about, whether it's from the mapping standpoint or whatnot, is you're going to have a layer that puts in all of these different. So you're going to have a public safety, so fire. You're going to have a real-time information, real-time crime center layer of around what's important to them, and then the company that can then build in public works that can figure out, hey, one of my police officers is driving down the road and there's a huge pothole right there, and they just put something into their system that says, hey, there's a pothole at 4th and Main, and then that goes to Public Works and gets put on a work order, and then that work order then goes and Public Works does this. So the thing that you're going to see is a better communication through a platform that is layered through all of the different departments is what I think you're going to see.
Yeah. I think maybe we need to have a conversation around that. I'll do an episode dedicated to that, what I call that aggregation platform,
Yep.
Kind of the event-based planning, event-based programming, or event-based architecture, that's what it is. But Terry, Dean, thank you guys so much. I know we probably could have gone on for a lot longer having this conversation. And this is exactly right? This is the banter that we have every time we go to a conference, and either at dinner time or in the hallway, we have these conversations like, God, how come that doesn't ever make it to the stage? So this is the stage where we get to have these conversations. Guys, thank you so much for your insights, sharing your time, and I look to have you back at some time in the future.